Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Mueller, the editor of Screen International, and a very warm welcome to this edition of Screen Talks. I'm delighted to be joined today by three acclaimed actor filmmakers, all of them UK born and raised, and all of them named stars of tomorrow in the early stages of their careers by Screen International. Not that we take any credit whatsoever for the extraordinary careers they have all gone on to carve for themselves. David Oyelowo is a multiple BAFTA and Emmy nominated actor and producer whose credits include Selma, United Kingdom, and Les Miserables. His film Come Away, in which he stars and produced through his Yoruba Saxon banner, had its premiere at the Sundance Film Festival in January, and he's due to make his own directorial debut with The Waterman for Shiv Hands Pictures. Andrea Riseborough is a BAFTA nominee and BIFA winner whose credits include Shadow Dancer, Birdman, and The Death of Stalin. Andrea had two films at Sundance this year, Possessor and Luxor, while her upcoming projects include Louis Wayne for Amazon and a project that she had been due to shoot this year for her production banner Mother Sucker Films, which I think had to be postponed, so she can tell us any updates on that. Noel Clarke is an actor, writer, director, producer, and winner of the BAFTA Rising Star Award in 2009, as well as being the creative force behind the Kidulthood trilogy. Clarke's company, Unstoppable Film and Television, has produced a multitude of film and TV projects, most recently season 2 of the Sky TV series Bulletproof, which he co-created alongside Ashley Walters. Welcome, Andrea, Noel, and David. So before we get underway, hi.
Hello.
Before we get underway, let's just note that this edition of Screen Talks was conceived as a conversation around life under lockdown, and we will keep that as our main focus as much as possible for today's discussion. However, since Andrea, Noel, and David had all confirmed their participation in today's talk, there have been huge protests in support of the Black Lives Matter movement on both sides of the Atlantic. It's very important that we acknowledge that, and each of our guests will just share a few thoughts at the top of the discussion before we then go into our sort of other discussion points. We'll also leave time for questions at the end for you, our live audience, in the second half of the webinar. Please use the Q&A channel for that, and my colleague Orlando Parfit will be moderating that for us. I would also like to add that we will be scheduling a future edition of Screen Talks in the next few weeks to address diversity and representation in the screen sectors and the steps that need to be taken to address a long-term systemic problem. We all need to be holding the industry to account and supporting it to do better. And this current time is just a very pertinent reminder of that. So welcome again, Andrea, Noel, and David. I really appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. Andrea and David, I know you're both in LA, so thank you for your early starts. And Noel, you're probably in London, so end of the day for you, but thank you again for joining us. As I sort of mentioned, can we just start a little bit, just a conversation at the top, just maybe share some of your thoughts about what the current sort of situation that is happening around the Black Lives Matter protests and the very tragic death of George Floyd. I mean, David, could we start with you on that? Any thoughts you have you want to share?
Yeah. I mean, it's been incredibly traumatic, saddening, debilitating. I am not the kind of guy who struggles to get out of bed, and I've had quite a few days of that recently. Partly because obviously we are in a moment where this pandemic has already wreaked havoc with us, but particularly with the Black and Brown community here in America. I think we hit the 100,000 mark in terms of deaths, and around about 60,000 of those people are Black and Brown people. So the disproportionate levels at which Black and Brown people are suffering across the world, but particularly here in America, truly exacerbated by the death of George Floyd, but also the horror of Amy Cooper in that situation with Christian Cooper, that really highlighted what we as Black people are facing. Amy Cooper is the kind of person who, had that incident not happened with her, she'd probably be marching and protesting against the death of George Floyd as we speak. Calling herself a liberal, calling herself a Democrat, calling herself an upwardly mobile, educated New Yorker. So this implicit bias that we as Black people talk about and are made to feel crazy when we talk about. It just feels like a moment where, for a time, people are looking at us and going, oh, I think I see what you're talking about now, which in some ways is gratifying, but is also maddening, because this is centuries old. It is indeed systemic. It permeates every single industry, ours particularly, when you consider how potent the entertainment is culturally in terms of what it represents to the world and the narratives it feeds the world. So, you know, we have been here before from a place of hope, of things are going to change. I think there are systemic things in terms of the criminal justice system here in America that may well change. I do think this is a different moment than we've ever seen before. But the thing that I am determined, and I'm sure a lot of people are determined, and I'm hoping white people who have been beneficiaries of this system are going to determine going forward, is that this will not be a blip. This will not be a moment. This will be a point beyond which they can agree to be held accountable to ceding some of the power that they have been afforded, benefited from, not necessarily of their own creation, but they can cede some of that power in order for a more equal world. So, you know, it feels like a moment beyond which more accountability can be demanded. And if I have anything to do with it, certainly will be demanded.
Thank you very much, David. Noel, could we come to you next?
Well, I don't know how anyone follows the most articulate man in the world. I think David's right. What happened with George Floyd, and particularly the Amy Cooper thing. Well, both things were terrible. But I think we as a people reached a breaking point. You know, there's only so much fear you can feel where you don't speak out, and then there's a point where you have to speak out. And I think this has been a point, or the things that have happened in the last week or so have brought us to our breaking point where people have to speak out. I spoke out about something myself, which ended up in all the newspapers. I think there are intrinsic, systemic, institutionalized things that have to change. And a lot of the time, it's not even from the people that are overtly like that. It's from the people that believe they're not, but they just cannot see it. And so what happens is they look at situations and go, well, I just don't see it. But that not seeing it is not good enough. It's not acceptable. And now things need to change. You know, when you've got actors like John Boyega marching in the street and leading the way and stuff like that, and still saying that he's fearful that his career might be over. 10 years ago, it probably would have. But I think things down to people like David, hopefully myself, and John himself being a younger, and some of the people before David and I, the years and years of breaking boundaries have got to a point where I think John Boyega is going to be absolutely fine, if I'm perfectly honest. But that's not the point. The point is he's still fearful. And that is what we have been going through in this industry for as long as this industry's been around, but in life generally for hundreds and hundreds of years. The fear of saying anything, because then you will be without and you will be done. And I think this time, hopefully, there is a systemic, institutional change that will come from this.
Yeah, thank you, Noel. Thank you. Andrea, would you like to share any thoughts? I know you had wanted maybe a colleague who has the British Blacklist to come on today. And as I mentioned to you, we're going to sort of create a sort of future webinar in which we will address this issue directly. So, but if you want to share any thoughts, please feel free. I'd like to hear from you.
I just feel like any other issues paling in significance compared to the one that we're facing in the last couple of days. And it cannot be ignored. And we need to put all of our support and energy towards creating a better situation. I also feel like I cannot speak. I can't share an experience that is the most valuable at this time as a white woman in the industry. But I can support. So I'm happy to be here today with these incredible actors, and I think it's a triumphant time. I hope this is a triumphant time.
Yeah, I think that's right, Andrea, and I think that's what we all sort of hope, and we all feel like maybe this will be a significant moment in history in which there is no turning back, and hopefully things will be able to change properly in a more, in a more constructive way for the entire industry. So I do appreciate you being.
I hope so. Otherwise, someone's gonna have to pay my mortgage for me.
Well, I do appreciate all of you sharing those thoughts. As I sort of said, there will be, it may come up during the conversation itself. There will be sort of questions at the end from our readers, I'm sure, that sort of touch on these topics as well. As I also said, the original point of this webinar was to kind of talk about life during the pandemic, another great crisis that's going on at the current time, which now sort of almost pales in significance in some ways, but of course it doesn't, because that's a very huge crisis for the entire world. And I wanted to just hear from the three of you about how life under lockdown has been so far. I mean, when did you first go into lockdown? What was your situation? Where are you currently spending it? And what's it been like for you in terms of what your own lives? How has it been so far? Andrea, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, it's been introspective. I mean, in many ways, this new term pivot that came about recently, it seems to be a completely pandemic related word, pivot. People they've started banding it about everywhere. I think it's a really interesting time for lateral thought and to imagine what our industry is going to look like when we come out of this, how it can be much more functional, better. And it may look completely different than we ever anticipated. And at the minute, I think it's so important to be flexible in terms of what that might look like. I think it's easy for this time for me has very much looked. I mean, it's so many things for all of us. I'm sure it's like looking in a constant mirror, isn't it? It's like being surrounded in a sense, by your own demons all the time. But it's also a time the pandemic, in a way, I think afforded us a time to regroup. I think it's so easy to get relentlessly caught up in the urgency of life when it actually is not that urgent, but we tell ourselves it is. And for us to all really think about what we want to do in the world. So I think that's been really a really valuable silver lining to something that isn't otherwise horrendous situation.
Yeah. And has it been very much life under lockdown for you? I mean, have you been only in your place of residence during this whole time? Or
I was in the Dominican Republic. I was to film called Geechee with a director called Du Bois Ashong, and the day that we were about to start filming, we flew home.
Yeah.
So it has been very much, yes, home.
Yeah. You've been in LA since then. Yeah.
I have.
So Noel, how has it been for you? I assume you're in London, or?
Yeah, I'm in London. Well, for me, the first and foremost thing in the last week or so is trying to explain to my 9-year-old who asked the question, why black men get killed by police. That's been the more recent part of it. But the original parts of lockdown, we were just finishing Bulletproof, the specials. We've done a sort of 3-parter, which is like a special. And we literally were flying back from South Africa. And as we were leaving South Africa, the first case was announced in South Africa on the day while we were in the airport. And we landed in London on March 5th or so. Sorry about the drilling. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry about that. We landed on March 5th or so. And we had a week a week and a half of London shoots, and the day after we wrapped, lockdown was announced. The day after we wrapped, so I've been in lockdown, and then our other show, The Drowning, which is Unstoppable's production, was shooting in Ireland and had 3 weeks to go and had to be closed down as well. So it's been there's been some trials, but I think what it's enabled me to do is, especially because we've obeyed the rules completely. Whatever rule they set, I've obeyed. You know, I've been inside. I haven't really left this place. We've gone for our health walks when we were allowed. But as I've become more and more of a businessman in this profession, it's given me less time to write, which is what got me here in the first place. But what this has allowed me to do actually is write. And I've delivered about 3 scripts. One of them already has gone out to people because, you know, it was in decent shape because I had time. You know, even though we had got the kids in homeschool, but I just had time. So I've been writing again, which is a passion of mine that I haven't been able to exercise as much because of the producing and the acting and whatnot. So it's been some positives to it.
Were these ideas that you already had, or were any of them inspired by the current situation that we're finding ourselves in? Any of the new projects you've written?
No, they were ideas I already had. I nearly, about a week in, I woke up next to my wife. I was like, as opposed to anyone else, it's always her, just generally. I did just and, and I said, I'm going to shoot a feature. I had an idea for a feature that was different to other lockdown features. I'm going to shoot it. I can buy the cameras myself. I can shoot it here. The house is pretty much deserted. And so I planned it all out. And then when there needed to be a few outdoor scenes. And when I went outside, there was just too many people. And I was like, okay, well, I'll shoot those after lockdown. And then by the time I started thinking about that, it just became like a regular film with like only a few weeks inside. So I was like, I can't be bothered. But I did have a pretty good idea, which was getting there, and then I kind of scrapped it.
Right. Okay. So David, coming to you next. How's your lockdown been so far?
Well, I was shooting a pilot in Baltimore here in the States. It was a 3-week shoot. It was a show called The President is Missing. It's a show I was also producing for Showtime here in the States. And we were only a week in to the shoot when, you know, and a few days into the beginning, people were sort of feeling like, you know, that we migrated from the handshake to the elbow bump to the kind of the love you, and then by the end of the week, it just, the hammer came down hard, you know. And for me, because Showtime is a company owned by Viacom, as you can imagine, with a big corporation like that, the moment it's about threat of life and health and the potential of being sued for whatever reason, I mean, I have never seen people leave a place as quickly. It was pandemonium. But rightly so. And just unprecedented. I mean, you know, millions of dollars being spent and then stop. So I was suddenly home with my family. I've pretty much been here for the now going on 3 months. You know, I have 4 kids, so we had to quickly navigate online schooling, but also I had a film that I had directed in post. We had shot it, we had pretty much edited it. I was doing a film in London before I started the pilot, and I'd already been editing remotely out of necessity because I was doing this film in London. So I kind of already made the transition a little bit, but man, there are things that are challenging in post during a lockdown. So the things that I couldn't have foreseen having to do remotely is ADR, for instance, where you're getting your actors to re-loop any dialogue that is unusable. We had to send sound kits to everyone's houses, wherever they may be. Then we had our sound engineers somewhere here in LA. And I am a Luddite when it comes to technology. So the fact that I had 3 screens here in my office. So the Wi-Fi had to be absolutely pristine, because you're trying to get your actors doing the lines whilst an image is being shown you. The Wi-Fi was never good enough for everyone. So you had to then, instead of what you would normally have, which is as a director, you're literally watching someone redo the line and you can gauge the performance and you can sort of say, okay, that's good, move on. You had to kind of guess. You had to listen to it. Then it had to be played back to you. And so everything took twice as long. Nothing was more challenging than getting the score done for the film, because we were going to have 40 people in, I think, where we were going to do, I think at one point we were going to do the score in Macedonia, but you simply couldn't have 40 musicians in a room playing together. So, and then because this has never happened in our industry before, no one had a playbook for what you do. So we were all trying to figure out in real time how we do this, because we had to deliver the film. We ended up having a situation, we found a studio in Belgium where there was a sort of central portal, and then there were recording booths off the desk, and individual musicians had to go and play in isolation. And then we had to layer those tracks to create essentially an orchestra digitally. Wow. The DI, coloring the movie. Normally, as a director, you're sat there and you are watching with your cinematographer and you're coloring everything. Everything took probably 3 times as long, because the DI, the sound mix as well, I was getting sent reels individually by every department. I would have to watch every reel 3 times for the sound, for the picture, for the score, and sometimes for the VFX. So, and it's my first film, so I know no different. So my producers are going, are you okay? Because this is horrendous. And I'm going, oh, is it? I'm watching my film more than I'd like, but you know, so yeah, the thing I will say is, I think for our industry, there are things that are never going to go back to the way they were. Right. You know, I'm speaking to editors, composers, colorists, cinematographers who are spending more time with their families whilst still working. I think there are marriages that are going to be saved by this. I think that there are kids who are going to be far more whole because they see more of their parents. Our industry is very hard on families. And I don't mind talking to my editor and his kids are running in the background, as long as the work gets done. And, you know, all this travel we would normally do to get to places to do this stuff, I think we now realize some of it isn't necessitous. I don't want to lose contact with human beings, but there are certainly some things that I think we're going to work out the kinks and are still going to be doable remotely going forward. And, you know, some of them are going to be preferable.
Yeah. What about you, Noel and Andrea? Do you feel like this is going to shift the way the industry works as well? I mean, are you considering your own, maybe you know, how much you might travel in the future, or what's your thinking around that? Andrea, any thoughts on that?
Hugely, yeah. In a sense, and I agree with David. The industry is really hard on families. So in a sense, it's been unusual and wonderful to be in one place. A lot of the circumstances aren't ideal, and you know what I failed to say when we started is that I was about to do the film. My company, Mother Sucker, we were producing a film called Supernova with Whoopi Goldberg and myself and Kareem Saleh and Kate Walsh, and it was New York, it was Coney Island, and it really had to be shot on Coney Island. You know, it's a sort of it may be one of the last chances that we get to shoot Coney Island in its sort of current state where it still retains some of its, archaic mystery. So that was going to go into production maybe 3 weeks after the lockdown happened, and I really don't know when we'll be able to shoot that again, is the honest truth. It has to be there. It's site specific. It can't be. There's no. The magic the director Angelica Zola wants to capture is right there. And it's a blow. It's a blow. An all-female crew, a lot of people depending on the work. It's difficult not to be able just to give people, in our industry, I think one of the things that's most frustrating sometimes is the instability, because it's so easy to make decisions motivated by fear, isn't it? And it's, really what I would love to be able to do is have a constant payroll for people, have, healthcare in all situations. Those are the sort of day-to-day things that I think we need to address. Those are the things that frustrate me most. The transience of not just cast, but, crew, the whole production, everybody's lives is such that there's very little stability. So I'd love to be able to be in a better financial position with my company moving forward in terms of how this is going to change my approach, to provide that stability no matter what happens for the people that I employ. And that takes an awful lot of money, and sometimes it takes me sending a script to somebody about a woman having a psychological breakdown and everybody going, good luck with that, and me saying, but could I have a few $1 million? And everyone goes, yeah, no, absolutely not. So it's sort of trying without compromising the integrity of what you're trying to make, and still wanting to preserve the vision of the director. You also want to be able to treat people in your employ in the best way that you can. And I think that's the important balance to be struck. And right now the world is on fire, screaming out for that demand to be met.
For your project, will your financiers remain on board, do you think? I mean, have you had those conversations, or is that something that you need to address down the line?
If our financiers are watching, please God, have faith.
I wanted to give you that opportunity. Yes. Wow. Well, how about for you, Noel? Obviously, your company has been backed by all three media since 2018. Is that giving you more stability in terms of where you're currently at, and what's the situation in terms of how the company's running now?
Yeah, it's given us a lot more stability. We are running virtually at the moment. Our offices are in the All Free building. There's a lot of people in there. So, and there's maybe 2 or 3 companies on our floor. So when this all happened, it was like zoop, shut down. So, but to be fair, we as our company, we've kept up. We do our depending on what it is, FaceTime, Zoom, this, that, the other. We do our meetings quite regularly, catch up on our slate, talk about the developments on the projects, quite regularly. We're in touch all the time, all of us, through email, WhatsApp, every day, countless times a day. Sometimes I would think we've maybe spoken more during this time than we would if we were sitting a few feet from each other in the office. So to be fair, apart from physical production, like on our show, Bulletproof was just ended luckily. But apart from our physical production on our show that went down, our development stuff has kept on rolling, and our things that need to go out to the companies are out, and the things that we're setting up are there. So that's all good. In terms of David's point about marriages saved, I think a few marriages are going to be over. And another thing, I am not a teacher. So as soon as them kids can get back to school safely, I want them back at school safely. I'm telling you, man. Woo. It's not easy. I got three under, I got 12, 9, and 4. I'm not a teacher. That's what I'm saying. It's not easy. Schooling is not the one.
Well, teachers are going to be a lot more appreciated, I think, beyond this as well.
Oh, I'm telling you, she's gonna get a handshake, elbow bump, hug, everything when I see them. When we get back, I'm gonna be like, here, take them.
Oh man.
And the next question is about moving out of lockdown. I mean, we see, you know, there's been some easing of restrictions, you know, obviously in America, now increasingly in the UK. The UK has recently issued new production guidelines to allow the resumption of film and TV production. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to read those guidelines yet, but I wonder what you're thinking, particularly as actors. What's going to make you feel comfortable going back onto a film set? You know, have you given thought to, you know, what the level of comfort will be to make you want to go back on a film set? And do any of you have any projects lined up this year to shoot? David?
Yeah, I mean, I've read a lot of them. You know, here in the States, anyway, some of them are slightly different. Some of them, a lot of them have commonalities. Here's how I feel about the whole thing. I think if you go in thinking that you are going to go back to something as it used to be, you are going to, we are in an adapt or die situation. I think there are going to be productions that are going to try to go back to what things were, and I think things are going to potentially go wrong. And I think the bigger the production, the more challenging. I personally, if I were talking to an independent producer, which, you know, my fellow actors here are, I certainly am, I would be choosing projects that are more doable with less people, less crew for now, so that we can learn what this new process is while people are safe. And you're just until we have a vaccine, until things are truly different, you just do not want to be ground zero for an outbreak. This thing is real. I know people, maybe not immediately, but I only have a degree of separation who have unwittingly died of this thing. It's very, very serious. You know, but I think there is also an opportunity. It's a little bit like with theater, because there are constraints, restraints. There is a creativity that gives birth to things that you just wouldn't think about unless you absolutely had to. And there is something exciting about that. I also think it's going to be a point beyond which new voices are going to emerge because they embrace the change as opposed to fight against it. I think it's going to be a point beyond which some companies, some creators are going to falter and maybe even, dare I say it, fall behind, because not unlike the whole situation we're talking about in terms of racial equality, there are going to be people who are going to try and hold on to the power, hold on to the comfort of what used to be. And if you don't recognize the moment, you are going to be left behind. I mean, I was meant to be shooting a film in August. It was a film about Sugar Ray Robinson, the boxer, a bigger movie. Nate Parker is directing that. And we realized that that's not going to be able to happen. We dusted off a script that Nate had written a while ago about a guy who had endured 7 years in solitary confinement and was now adapting to the world around him. And what we've done, which has been a sort of masterstroke, has been, you now have this guy coming out of solitary confinement into a world that has been self-isolating because of the pandemic. So, you know, has his reality sort of morphed into the reality of the world. I'm just saying that as an example of how there are things you can do, there are mindsets you can adopt that may speak to the moment in ways that are more exciting than maybe what was the case before. But we must embrace it. In terms of bigger productions, I'm very curious how a Marvel movie picks back up. You know, even the show I was doing in Baltimore, we had at least 150 people in the soundstage every day. You know, those guidelines are going to be tricky with that many people. You know, some of them talk about actors doing their own makeup. I mean, literally, there are people who are not going to go to work. I mean, they're even saying no, don't have any makeup. You know, that's one of the more trivial things we have to deal with. But yeah, it's and this pod system as well. I don't know how that's going to work. You know, not having certain sections interacting. I think here we have them. We're calling them COVID coordinators, people who are literally going to be shouting, saying 6 feet, 6 feet, 6 feet. You know, keeping people apart.
Yeah.
So what we do is so delicate. It's already so challenging to tell the truth under these very artificial circumstances of a film set. To then have the sort of COVID police around at the same time is going to be challenging, which is why I say, you know, personally, I would want to do it on a smaller scale to begin with, and then learn those lessons and sort of build out.
Yeah. What was your thinking on this, Noel?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what David said, I think there are a lot of people itching to get back, and I think that will be a mistake. I think time should be taken to really assess what's happening. For me personally, what would make me feel safe, because I do have a movie to star in, and also I was about to be in another network show as well. I think you need to make sure that the testing is prevalent. You know, they need to find out what the most accurate antibody tests are, or really identify a test that can tell people whether they have it. And you need to be tested 3 times a week. You know, it needs to be mandatory. It needs to be put into the schedule, like come in before makeup, people get their test, you know, and that needs to happen consistently. And I think, you know, with these sorts of things, but of course that adds time to your day, that adds cost to your budget, that adds time to your schedule. All these things will have to be taken into account. But I think if there are people that want to rush, you know, or want to move faster, then these things kind of have to be mandatory. I need to know that everyone comes in on a Monday, and before work starts, you know, in a one-way system, people get tested. And, you know, there are results now. I had one the other day, 20 minutes, you get your results. And so, you know, admittedly, they're only 98% accurate, but, you know, I'm not a scientist, that's not my job. But I think, you know, if we can do this and you know, find tests that are more accurate, or get people to really implement this stuff and know that it's going to impact their budget and their schedule and things like that, then that's another way that you can start building out from.
Yeah. And Andrea, what about you? Have you looked at any of these production guidelines, and what are you thinking around them and getting back onto a film or TV set?
Yes, I have seen them. I mean, I think for as an actor, what would make me feel more comfortable, it remains to be seen for me. You know, I feel like what we do is so intimate, and when we do it with such abandon most of the time, that just the reality of it, again, not wanting to lose the beauty of what we're actually trying to create. The reality of it is something very intimate, and that is physical and emotional and mental and all of those things, you know. So I've been using the time though as an opportunity to, you know, those scripts that have got shoved to the bottom of the pile because, you know, agencies or companies feel like they weren't the right fit at the time. Some of those have come to the forefront now, and I've really managed to sort a few out that I really loved, but nobody sort of had faith in, that are actually maybe, you know, they're local to where I am, or there's some sort of manageable way that you can just imagine, without traveling a huge group of people to a different country or city, how you could make them. And I do think out of this time, or what I'm hoping is that we'll see we'll see the sort of eight mid-range price film come back. You know, I feel in a way like everything for quite some time it's been so little sort of $8 million to $20 million movies made, and there's been loads of micro budget movies, which is wonderful, and you know, loads of really, really big budget movies. So I think in a way, if studios are willing to invest on a more, you know, not just on one movie perhaps, but on maybe 4 or 5, you know, or 20 for the amount that they were going to invest in one, that are more feasible in terms of actually just being able to get it made and having to travel people around less, then I think that's a really exciting possibility, because I think we've lost something there in the middle ground.
Yeah. I'm going to switch over to reader questions now. We have quite a few, as you can imagine. So what I'm probably going to do is just ask each of you one question and then not get everyone to answer. But if anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. But I'm just going to do one question per person. So I'm going to start off with a question from Dana Ho, who asks, how serious are the problems with filming delays and talent scheduling conflicts for the productions that you're involved with in the next 18 months? David, can I lob that one your way?
Yeah, there are a few challenges ahead. Obviously, when the lockdown started, a lot of productions stopped dead in their tracks, and a lot of money had already been spent. Now, all of those production companies, all of those financiers, of course, would want to hope to go back and finish those projects, partly just to, you know, they will, everyone has lost money through this, but in order to try and retain some of the investment, you've got to finish the project. Now, we will have a lot of studio space, locations. There's going to be an arms race to sort of get in and get those locations back. But it's going to be the same thing with actors. You know, they have schedules that they, especially the kind of actors that get things green-lit. There are now going to be other films that are waiting on them in order to start, and then they'll have films that didn't finish. And so there's going to be this huge log jam there. So that's going to be incredibly challenging, and it's unprecedented. So I think a huge amount of understanding and generosity is going to have to be employed. What normally happens in our business is that, you know, when you're signing these contracts, a project has is in first position, another one is in second position. There's going to have to be the kind of conversations that lawyers don't enjoy, which is, okay, you got to meet me halfway here. How can we work together to have the actor finish?
And no lawyer ever.
Exactly. So some new habits are going to have to be formed. Otherwise, nothing is going. If people dig their heels in and say, force majeure be damned, act of God be damned, they were supposed to start and so, then that, and I don't think that's going to happen, because it's affected everyone. So it's going to be challenging for sure. I think there are some projects that unfortunately are going to die on the vine. You know, that you're going to have to look at the sort of cost loss benefit and go, yes, we spent that much money, but to bring everyone back and finish this is going to cost 3 times as much as we originally budgeted for this. And we've had 9 months, 12 months of inactivity without incoming and a lot of outgoing. I think we're going to have to let this one go. So I think that's going to be the tricky thing as well. Go on, Noel.
I agree with David, and I think in TV it's even more complicated, because, for example, we have in Bulletproof, I work with Ashley. Ashley has another show,
Right.
And thus that's not like a 6-week shoot. You know, both our shows are like 8-month shoots. So this now knocks on, and whoever's in first call now has to kind of wait you know, as with 2 TV schedules where you're the lead in both shows, it's not a case of meet me halfway. Like it cannot happen. So somebody essentially will have to go, we have to push our thing now. We have to wait until they start, until the pandemic is in a place where people can shoot. We have to wait for that. And at that point, whoever's in first call gets to shoot first. And then the other show's going to have to then wait another 8 months. Now, because he's the lead in both shows, that probably somebody will wait. But when you have actors that maybe are supporting or second, like it's a problem. And people are going to lose jobs and whole shows might actually be cancelled. They might be like, well, if by the time we wait and then it's shot and then it's brought on, it's going to be 2 years since the last one. Is there a point in putting it on 2 years since the last one, or 2.5 years? Will anyone remember it, et cetera, et cetera? So there are a lot of these issues that are popping up and are really tricky. I mean, personally, I'm hoping a few of David's films clash so that I might get a look in on a couple of them if he's not able to. Let them clash. Anyone who's hiring David and his films have clashed. Hey, I'm joking.
Available.
I'm joking.
There's always a silver lining.
Always a silver lining, yeah. No, in all seriousness, so those things are still a problem that still need to be worked out. And there's a lot of shows, actors that, you know, did pilots and the pilots are picked up and they were going to do it's a real cluster, as they say, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Andrea, I'm going to give you the next one as someone who's, as a producer of moving into independent productions. For independent films, would pay VOD or direct to streaming be a better alternative to theatrical? Or do you see it as essential to have a theatrical release as well as a streaming release? And what's your feeling around windows?
I mean, I don't see it's essential to have a theatrical release. I mean, I think in a sense, those are two different conversations, because the commune of being in a movie theater and what it gives to us, the exchange of ideas, the space where we quietly watch something together, the preservation of that is one thing, and that's its own challenge. And you know, a lot of small independent theaters, particularly, are going to close down because of the pandemic. So unfortunately, I feel like in terms of people having access to it and distribution, I don't feel like a theatrical release is necessary. I feel like we've entered a time of filmmaking where all of us consider what size this image is going to be. And it may be very, very small. It may be the size of a phone. And it's interesting what does and doesn't translate at that size. So no, I don't think it's essential. In a way, I wish it was. And I don't feel like independent cinemas, I feel like they're essential for different reasons. I feel like they're essential parts of our community. I feel like cinemas at large, you know, multiplexes are essential parts of our community. I prefer myself to go to an independent one, but
Are you all missing the cinema going experience?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us that's where a lot of us anyway fell in love with film and storytelling. It's larger than life. It's you know, you escape into this portal that is both your mind and is a shared experience. You know, it's a truly beautiful thing. But you know, you have, when I say adapt or die, the audience have changed. What we, certainly I valued when I was younger, I look at my kids and they don't even really watch television. They watch YouTube and Netflix is what they actually watch. And they have no problem watching on a tablet, on a phone. And you know, in the same way that when we were kids, we thought our parents were sort of fuddy-duddy and sort of set in their ways. You know, we've got to be careful of about doing the same thing, because they are imbibing probably more content you know, than even we did. They are binge watching things. They're watching whole seasons of things. My you know, the Stranger Things came out, and one of my sons literally spent a whole day just watching the whole thing, and then, you know, paid for it with a lack of sleep and red eyes the next day, but was exhilarated by that fact. I can't attest to that kind of experience, but when he's my age, he's going to be reminiscing about, you remember when we would spend 10 hours just watching the one thing, you know? So that's now their experience, and it's something to be embraced. And the reality is, for us as storytellers, that's a new possibility. I mean, these scripts that Andrea is dusting off, you can now look at them and go, actually, fine, they're telling me this is a challenge in a movie theater, but this idea, is it something that can now migrate into something else and shows real fiscal promise, because it's the kind of things streamers are saying. You know, I've certainly seen things that I insist as a producer were a half-hour comedy, or were, and you show it, you know, different streamers, different channels have different needs. And I've started, instead of going to them and saying, I've created this, I've developed this, what do you think? I've now reversed it and said, tell me what you need and let me see if I can deliver that for you. And literally in the last 2 weeks, a show that I'm now developing for Disney Plus was exactly that. I took them something that, for whatever I thought was a home run there, and they went, it's not what we're looking for, which, you're Disney, how can this not be what you're looking for? And so I out of necessity, which is what you have to do as a producer, you cannot take no for an answer. I never take no for an answer. And so I said, okay, talk to me about what your needs are at this company. And I had something that had been passed on by every streamer 2 years earlier, became or is something that this specific new platform needs. And here we are in development, and it's not how I originally conceived it. So, you know, I think to dig your heels in and say, this is a movie, this is again, in the world of adapt or die, you're gonna get left behind if you're not prepared to evolve.
It's almost reminiscent of the transition, or it feels there's a likeness between what we're going through now and the transition between silent film and talkies, in a sense. You know, yeah. The idea of bringing sound, in order to bring sound to the world, we made our sets totally quiet. You know, you can hear a pin drop. And that was a really difficult transition for those people who already inhabited that world. And I feel like this is a wonderful opportunity, but we haven't caught up to ourselves yet. So in terms of, you know, AMPUS, the Academy, different, you know, SAG, there are certain, in order to get an award for something you've done, for example, which is a great way, it's a great platform for a smaller film to then have a larger life. You need to be recognized by that platform. In order to do that, you have to have a theatrical release. So I think we're sort of at odds with ourselves in that area where we need to reassess what those rules are, basically, because I really think everything on demand should be able to be nominated. You know, I mean, it's the most free, we're in the most free sort of democratic place that we've ever been in terms of what people can have access to. So I'd love to see changes there, and I'm part of the Academy. You know, I'd love to look to making those changes. I want to talk about that within the Academy, and I think that's an exciting prospect.
I think it's a good move. I'm on the BAFTA film committee and part of that, and we did that over here. So I think that it's a logical next step, you know, because, you know, if you think about, you know, Netflix, for example, 5 years ago, 6, I don't know, if they had one film that was eligible, that became eligible, which was Beast of No Nation, and they had literally bought cinemas, put it in the cinemas, and, you know, and whatnot. Like last year or this year, they had like 28 films, like, you know, and they didn't have to have theatrical releases because BAFTA has changed the rules. So I think that's a natural. The problem is there's almost too much content to be able to judge fairly for any of these awards now. it's going to come down to marketing.
But I will say, and something, because I know we're about to wrap up, you know, the change has already happened, is the truth of the matter. The audience has already changed. So it's for AMPAS, BAFTA, SAG to catch up with an audience who, you know, there are certain things they want to see. My kids, they want to see Marvel movies and Star Wars in a movie theater. I'm sorry, the reality is that there are just certain things that they don't feel like they need to see. And we've also shrunk the windows, the distribution windows enough that they're happy to wait for the month or two that it will take before they get to see it. I also think it's an amazing thing that the audience now has the power. You know, when I talk to these streamers, it's egregious because they talk about algorithms and the data of who's watching what, and therefore they've got to play to that. But it means that more Black and brown people are being seen because the audience is speaking. It's not some gatekeeper saying, Black doesn't travel, or the audience isn't ready for that kind of content yet. The audience is showing them on the data in real time. This is what I want to see, give it to me, or I won't subscribe anymore. And just to go back to where we started this conversation, when it comes to Black representation and just what's going on in the world right now. 6 years ago, you know, this film I did, Selma, coincided with Eric Garner being murdered. And that was the last time we were in a place of I can't breathe. And I remember, you know, at the premiere of Selma, us wearing I Can't Breathe t-shirts in protest. And members of the Academy called in to the studio and our producers saying, how dare they do that? Why are they stirring SHIT? And we are not going to vote for that film because we do not think it's their place to be doing that. And that literally happened. I haven't really talked about that before. But that happened, and it's part of why that film didn't get everything that people feel it should have got, and it birthed Oscar So White. They used their privilege to deny a film on the basis of what they valued in the world. What we're just talking about right now in terms of streaming, the audience will do that, because that's what caused Oscar So White. The audience went, no, we do not subscribe to that. And it eventually meant that the business had to adapt. And that's what this is as well. The audience spoke then, protesters are speaking now, the audience are speaking by what they subscribe to. And if our business decides to dig its heels in and says, no, you are going to have to watch things within a certain theatrical window, you watch what happens. I mean, you know, Netflix will buy all of those theaters, and those people will become Blockbuster. So, you know, that it's with us. The change is with us. We either join the revolution or get left behind.
Well, speaking of evolution and changes in the industry, I know we're nearly out of time, so maybe I'll just do this as the last question from Benedict L. And this is really to all of you. He asks, as physical productions have to consider COVID-19 safety measures and work in new ways, do you think this could be an amazing opportunity to demand that equality, diversity, and environmental issues are also addressed going forward? Andrea?
May I answer that? Yeah, I was just, it's actually making it harder.
Right.
So things like the Annenberg inclusion rider that Frances McDormand talked about when she accepted the Oscar. In a way, I feel almost like there's, companies, when I'm, as an actor, when I'm making a deal with a company, they almost have more leverage right now to be able to say, look, there's so much going on that we cannot meet these needs, these demands. This cannot be included in the contract. Which is when I walk away, from the project. But I would say, if anything, it's making it more difficult. And I've heard about, well, I know of a few, particularly studios, who've been essentially asking you to make them completely void of any responsibility for them getting COVID. You know, should you get COVID? And that's also really worrying, because when people need money and they need to get back to work, and they're going to compromise their own health to do it. So in a sense, it's the worst time to ask for those things, but I think it's the time where actually we have the most power to ask, and we need to remember that in the transaction, because they are much more desperate than we are. And in a sense, you know, as creatives, you know, in any area of the film industry, and as crew, creatives, technical people, you know, we have access to the creativity and the knowledge, and that's something very powerful and something to remember. So it's the worst time to ask, and it's the time that we absolutely should make all of those demands, because I don't think that they're going to have a choice.
Yeah. Yes. Let's hope you're right. Yeah. We'll see what happens, but let's hope you're right. David and Noel, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I think Andrea's right, but I also think that it's a good time for people that haven't before really thought about that. They now have time to reassess themselves and check themselves, you know, because while there aren't things shooting, they better be damn sure that when it does start shooting again, they're making sure all their efforts are put in to find the most diverse cast and crew for their projects. They can't, there's no excuse. It's not like they're shooting, oh, we didn't have time. It's like nobody's shooting anything now. So now you have time to really think about it, check yourself, and make sure that when you get up and running, you are in a position where you're representing people fairly. I think, you know, again, trust me, David knows I'm anti-system, like, but you know, I am on the BAFTA Film Committee. I will say, you know, the new stuff that's been implemented by BAFTA and the BFI is hard. It's like, if you do not meet certain diversity requirements, your film is not qualifying. You know, and I was on the committee, and I know we can't talk about what we talk about in there, but that's out there now. That's one of the things I was more than happy to be a part of. You know, if you do not hit certain requirements, your film will not qualify. That is the be all and end all of it. There's no like, but we couldn't find, or there wasn't a good enough boom opera. You won't qualify. And I think these are the sort of hard, stringent things that need to happen. And this time, although unfortunate for many, many reasons, hopefully gives people time to check themselves and go, I need to do better. And hopefully they'll start doing that.
And you know, to throw in something controversial before we end, no, with the BAFTA thing, what BAFTA needs to do is to not be so closely tied to the Oscars. It needs to happen at a different date.
Yeah. So by the way, I'm not Mr. BAFTA, you know, just so you know. I'm not.
No. But while we have the platform, yes, BAFTA has done some great things, but BAFTA cannot be like the Golden Globes and everything else, just a precursor, and so therefore a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy of, you know, just basically a road trip for Hollywood to hit London on the way to the Oscars, because we have a very specific identity as the British film industry that should be independent of that. That's something to also be thinking about in this moment. Who are we as the British film industry? Not just a stop on the way to the Oscars. That will bring about real change. Because when you think about the Grammys is independent of the Mobos and the whatever. It's just, it's separate. The Emmys has its own identity because it's not, you know, the BAFTAs is not a stop. The TV BAFTA is not a stop on the way to the Emmys. No. Change that date.
Yeah.
You are not, not Oscars, you know, Oscars' poor cousin. Change the date, independent, be something that is truly autonomous of that. Take back the power, BAFTA. I'm just saying.
Yeah. I'll be sure to pass on the message, David.
I think they heard it.
Well, that very sadly brings us to the end, and I could carry on talking, but I know you all have days to get on with, and Noel and an evening to get on with ahead of you. So I would just like to extend my heartfelt thanks to all three of you. You've been absolutely brilliant guests. Thank you so much for sharing all of these personal sort of thoughts and opinions and memories and recollections. It's been great to have you as guests. So just before we go, please keep an eye out for details of the future webinar I mentioned at the top on diversity and representation. And also next week's edition of Screen Talks is going to be dedicated to talking about the new UK production guidelines, which are going to aim to get UK film and television production up and running again. That's going to take place next Thursday, June 11th. As ever, all of our talks are available on demand on screendaily.com the next day, so check out the site tomorrow for this one. And on that note, thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you again to our very esteemed guests, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.